Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about aspects of culture and context which shapes frames of teaching and learning. So there's a lot of words that I want to define here first. So that's sort of the outline. I want to define what I mean by culture and context, then get into what are frames in my view. Then I'm going to tell you what the research question is, unpack it. Then we'll get into a lot of findings. We'll have a few discussions, and then I want to give you a takeaway at the end. And so culture to me for this study was the collections of behaviors, values that are learned and shared and exhibited by a group of people, in this case, a group of instructors. Additionally, I include norms, which are the rules and expectations that people have with regards to behaviors. So the concern that I had here was to examine sort of salient themes within behavior, values, and norms in how instructors talk about mathematics and how they teach it and how their students will learn it, with the goal in mind perhaps to see how cultures of education are already appearing in new instructors' teaching practices from the get-go. Now, next up here is context. I mostly wanted alliteration. I really mean by context here as like the predominantly white institution designation that this study was in. Predominantly white means that at least 50% of the students identify as white. And so this is coming off the heels of me taking a critical theories class and talking about critical whiteness. And so having done this study at a predominantly white institution, I asked myself and was concerned of, wait, is whiteness also seeping into the math classrooms in some way, form, or another? And then I was like, how is this even conceptualized in the mathematics classroom? And so I borrow from Harris, Ladson, and Billings and Tate about this idea of whiteness as a property. And it has 4 functions. It has reputation and status, 1. It has the right to be disposed, so you could move it around, you could give it to somebody can own it. It can be used and enjoyed for the privileges that it has. And most sort of prominently here is that it has the absolute right to exclude others from having it. So one of the ways that whiteness is defined in critical whiteness studies is that it's defined because it is able to exclude others. Okay, so I took this and I was like, it's cut off here. But I wanted to see if college mathematics instructors at a PWI who are learning to teach for the first time, what if they're treating mathematics knowledge as a sort of property that has all of these properties also, that has all of these functions, I mean. So it has reputation, it has status. And I'm going to talk about it more later when we get into the findings, what I mean by these and how it appears in the math classroom. And so the last word I want to define for you for the title is frames. Generally, frames allow you to filter, organize, make sense of information. We all walked into this classroom. You all saw me stand up here. You've already began to understand what's happening in this room. But for instructors, frames allow us to understand what aspects of teaching or learning they highlight, how they interpret these aspects for the purpose of enacting on them so their students can learn. Note though, we'll circle back to this and I'll expand on what I mean about frames specifically in the context of teaching and learning. But for now, this is good enough for you to understand the research question, which is kind of hefty. I'm looking at the aspects of culture and context that were salient in the experiences of math grad students teaching as instructors of record for the first time, which could be attributed to influencing their frames. And here I want to sort of highlight that this is happening at the stage where these instructors are teaching for the first time, because I wanted to see on your first go around, are you already exhibiting sort of like the cultural norms, the behaviors, the values that this department culture has? And also this idea of, are you treating knowledge as a property? Okay. All right. So for my dissertation, I studied 3 graduate students and instructors teaching for the first time one of these courses, intermediate algebra, college algebra, or math for liberal arts. And this is a large part, this is a bigger narrative discussion about their experiences in general, but for today, I just want to focus on culture and context. So I had 5 structured interviews with weekly classroom observations for all of them. And I drew on grounded theory and a lot of thematic coding analysis to sort of build this sort of back and forth. I had the pre-semester interview, then I went and observed them based on what they talked about in their pre-semester interviews of, I really would want to do this in my classroom. And on the first interview, I was like, well, I observed you and I did see some of that, but you also did something else. So let's unpack that. What does that mean? Where did that come from? Why are you doing that? And then I take those responses and I take it in the next observation. What are they doing now? And so all three graduate students were sort of followed in this way, and all of them started diverging into their own path of what it means to teach, what it means to learn. And so that's what the semester looked like. And then afterwards, I looked at the entire data and I asked myself, is this speaking towards culture? Is it speaking towards behavior, value, a norm? And then in another sort of analysis, I looked at it as, are they talking about math knowledge for the purpose of property? Like, are they treating knowledge as something that they have and that students will be given, right? And then lastly, it's a lot. And then I connected back to frames. And we'll talk about that in a bit. All right, so now let's get into findings. Hopefully this is like, we have a lot of answer findings. So, aspect of filters. Behaviors. For me, this referred to how instructors acted inside and outside of the classroom. And so, the very first one is there was this fear of appearing incompetent and unprepared across the three graduate students and instructors. It is their first time teaching, so it's kind of expected. There's a lot of anxiety when it comes to teaching for the first time. This came up a lot whenever people made a mistake. I'm not the one that pointed it out. It just came up like in the interviews. They're just like, oh, I remember doing this thing and I made that mistake. The second one is letting the class get rowdy since they didn't know how to respond to that. I'll talk more about this actually in another talk, but this idea of classroom management was not something that they were like oriented towards or trained in. They were taught to do active learning and attend to content and all this. So the idea of having knowledge in terms of classroom management never came across. And so they were like, I don't know what to do with that. And so they just let them be rowdy. They let some students leave early and all these things. And then the last thing that I want to sort of highlight here is they like to attend to more silent groups during the breakout groups. So whenever they're active learning, like whenever they're doing the breakout groups, I asked them, how do you decide which table that you're going to go to? And they're just like, all of them were attending to this idea of, I'm going to go gravitate to the table that's silent. Because to me, that indicates that they're not talking to each other. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing. So that's alarming. And to Carlos specifically, that's even more of a signal for help than a group of people having a sort of argument about how to do a problem. Because at least they're talking about the problem. So for Carlos here, Carlos was like, that's an issue. They're not even talking because that's the form of learning that we're doing here. Okay, value to me refers to what instructors valorize about teaching, learning, and the overall experience that they had during the semester. And the thing that I want to highlight here is just this one thing. Expectations and beliefs that they had about teaching that were challenged with the realities that they face in the classroom. So for Paul, he found the experience less scary than he expected. He actually had a lot of fun because the class that he was teaching, Math for Liberal Arts, had activities. It wasn't just like you're doing problems every day. And so he ended up valuing activities more than the algorithms. He actually skipped one of the sections in the course because he wanted to do an activity instead that he believed was more valuable to students learning and take what they're going to take away from this class later on. Carlos valued a lot of feedback, but did not expect the time sink that it would be in his mastery-based courses because he has to regrade, like reattempts on mastery-based assignments. And it's cut off here, but Andy valued a lot more general and sometimes technical explanations. But her students complained. They were like, can we just get the one solution, the quick one? And so all of them faced this sort of like, I expected one thing and I got something else. And so that's sort of what I wanted to highlight there. And then lastly, for norms, this one largely refers to the rules and expectations which govern the discussion in the classroom. And so challenges on what to attend to, right? So the first one was, do I attend to algorithms or do I attend to conceptual ideas? When I'm talking to students, should I highlight the algorithms more or the conceptual ideas? It became an expectation for both Carlos and Andy to explain or expand on the algorithm to a solution after a student provided a numerical answer. Like it just became an expectation. Like a student will raise their hand, say the answer is 50,500. And then students will be like, okay, let's look to Andy or Carlos. They're going to explain how that student got that, right? And then for Paul, since he was teaching the Master Liberal Arts course, he really faced this idea of, do I really want to attend to the rigor/technical language of the core of the mathematics, or do I want to give them more intuition that they can walk away with and remember? And so what he ended up doing is every time a student answered, he would always be like, explain your thought process. Every time I walked into that observation, a student answers and they're just like, explain your thought process. Like it became like a thing. And I called him out on it in an interview and he was like, yeah, the students have gotten used to it. I do it every single day. They know that if they respond, they will be asked to explain their thought process. And it ended up working well. Like students were not shied away. And this goes into sort of Paul's experience, like validating and not justifying and uplifting students' responses. So none of them were scared that they were going to be wrong, but they did expect that they were going to be asked to explain their thoughts. Okay, let's start going kind of faster because I'm halfway there. An overlap between all of those, though, is this idea that all of them valued interactions individually a lot more than the lecture. They like to interact with students table to table or individually to individually. They didn't really like teaching out in the front of the board. They try to lessen that as much as possible and focus more on the breakout group work. Andy going so far as to say that actual learning happens in the small groups as opposed to her lecturing in front of the board, which I think stuck out to me a lot. Okay. Right. Like I said, there's a lot. So now let's flip the script. Let's look at context. So the first function of whiteness that I mapped onto mathematics knowledge is to treat mathematics knowledge as a static body of knowledge. It's not changing. It's not growing. It's just kind of handed down. We're supposed to just deliver it. And it's given to a person. And here I highlighted in red Louis et al. Because that's how they sort of that's the example that they gave as a deficit way of framing mathematics. And then given to a person to me was from the idea of the banking model of education for Ferry. And so that's how I developed that mapping. And so all three of them understood that they are giving the knowledge to students, right? They are the expert in the room. And for them to be deemed a successful instructor, a skillful instructor, that person should be able to explain abstract ideas with flexibility and versatility. As in, you can explain different concepts differently if students don't jive with your original explanation. But one instructor did explicitly went against this idea of static, in that we had a discussion about this idea of essentialism, where you try to make a definition for something, and so it fits in a nice little box. And so we had a nice discussion of that, and this quote came up. Oh yeah, I forgot to say, in this section, I'm not giving the names of the graduate students because I don't want you to like make the connection. It's already pretty easy to sort of de-anonymize the people because it's a small cohort of students. But this person said, mathematics is sort of like a living subject. It wasn't handed down to us from God. It was constructed by humans to solve real world problems. And so this was going against this idea of it's a static body of knowledge. We are building it concurrently. But again, they do have this sort of flavor of, I am the expert in the room. I am giving these students some knowledge. Okay, next one. Absolute right to exclude, which treats mathematics knowledge as something to exclude students from participating. And so a math person versus not. When we think about like math placement exams that already tell somebody you're not allowed to be involved in the class that you thought you were going to do, you had to take this other class. All three of them opposed this idea. They're just like, no, I want every student in the classroom to be actively working with each other. And perhaps this is shaped by the department's teaching orientation, which heavily leaned on active learning and group work as a style of learning and teaching. And observations confirmed their attempt and insistence that every student participate and engage. There were some students that did not want to do that. They had this idea of, I'm just going to do it myself, but they still insisted. They still were like, you really need to talk to your roommates. And then one instructor and I think I said this in one of the talks as a comment, one of them even explicitly made it a goal for their students to learn how to be good classmates, just to have this idea of you're not going to exclude anybody in this group. Anybody at your table, you need to be good classmates to each other. Okay, reputation and status. I'm not going to read off the slides, but the gist that I have here, the more interesting bit and conversation that I want to unpack later at a different time is they didn't speak about reputation or status for their students. They always looked at their students compassionately. Whenever students struggled, they never gave them a label of like, oh, they're not doing, they're a bad student. But whenever they made a mistake in instruction, they looked at themselves as, oh no, now my reputation as the expert in the room is in danger. Now people might think that I'm unprepared. In one of the post-semester interviews, when we talked about their evaluations, one of them even went so far as to say that, yeah, I expected this because I made a lot of mistakes. And it's something that really haunts me because I didn't want it to be confirmed in an evaluation, but I see it in writing that the student thought I was unprepared. And so this is kind of a very interesting conversation. Okay, the right to use and enjoy, which I already sort of talked about. They really wanted everybody to sort of come together. But in this sense, it's also about power and privilege. And it didn't really surface in our conversations, the idea of power and if you have knowledge, then you are privileged. One instructor said that they wanted to make an egalitarian classroom where everybody is equal. And another realized that they probably should change the way that they're teaching, because the way that they're teaching is how they prefer to learn, not necessarily how their students prefer to learn. And so there are these sort of like notes and themes about like, I would like them to also use this information. I would like them to also enjoy this information. I can't be the only person enjoying the classroom experience. Okay. Goodness. It's a marathon. Okay. Finally circling back to this. Okay, I want to give you a concrete definition of how I view frames of teaching. It involves how they perceive and enact on their role, the professional knowledge that's relevant to them and doing the role, and then the interactions in the classroom that sort of solidify their role as an instructor. And then I just want to connect it to some of the things that I saw. Behavior. They're mimicking instructors that they've seen before. And they don't want to be perceived as incompetent. Value, giving lots of feedback, realizing what they value. Rigor and versus general understanding, that isn't necessarily what students wanted. And then norm, methods class. Individual interactions with students are more valuable than lecturing on the board, which to me was very interesting. Okay. We're gonna skip the learning. I feel bad, but you can check out the slides later because I really do want to get to this point. So Shiner and Louis already went ahead and confirmed that frames as a thing are shaped by culture. That's not what I'm arguing here. We know that. What I'm arguing here is that I want to shed more light in how frames and its aspects are informed by culture and the context. This overlap of the behavior, the norms, and the instructors on that I want to teach more individually than on the lecture is something that speaks towards the usefulness of a common professional development. All of them were trained in this idea that you really should be active learning. They really should be working together in groups. And so that speaks to this power of a common professional development that instills this idea of what is a good instruction at this department. And lastly, didn't want to skip that much. Louis in 2017 coined the term culture of exclusion. And so what I found here is, sure, the idea of culture of exclusion can permeate and pervade and like invade within classrooms, but you can also have more exclusionary cultures that seep into the classroom, right? It's not just the negatives that get to seep in, because this department had that training and that local department level culture that seeks to include, that ended up also seeping into the classroom. And so it's not all doom and gloom, but the task is not over. These were just 3 first-time instructors at one context, and he was fortunately in a department that was very supportive of them, gave them a lot of support to implement these inclusive practices. And so perhaps the department level emphasis on that is helpful. A sort of unified mission that mathematics teaching looks like this, will function like this. And lastly, since I am a graduate student, I would like more graduate student instructor work to happen because we need to understand how to better prepare them. Because for me, if you want to change the culture of college instruction, it has to begin with the people teaching. And for the most part, it's looking like graduate students are the majority of the instructors that teach these first year courses. And that's it.
All right, really good stuff. So any questions from the audience?
So it is extremely overwhelming, and that does come up with all of the 3 graduate students instructors that I participated in. In terms of advice, I'm not sure if I'm the person to speak on that because I haven't really thought about developing professional development yet. Would you like to comment?
Hello, I'm editing Johan. I did not ask for this person's permission if she wanted to be in recording or on record. So I'm just going to sort of read over what she said in my voice. If you remember that this is you, I can cite you in the comments if you ever come across this video. But this person said, I work for the Center for Teaching and Learning on my campus, and I do professional development for graduate students. And I gave a talk earlier this week on easy add-ons for you to use in class. They're all active learning things that can really take little time to do. And so I think these are things out there that count as active learning. And active learning does not have to be something that takes 20 minutes of your class to do. It can be something that takes 1 minute check-in at the beginning of class. That's active learning. A 1 minute reflection. That's active learning. Doing a pause slide in the middle of your lecture and intentionally asking for questions where students are writing down their ideas on a piece of paper is active learning. And so I think there's this temptation to think that active learning is this really complicated thing that you have to take a lot of time. And I really, really encourage us all to think about active learning as not something that has to be this big, enormous task, nor does it need to be something that you have to do a ton in your class, right? Doing those little things in class can be so helpful for students. Doing think, pair, share, where they are turning to their neighbors and talking for 2 minutes, where you have a timer going on the board, can also boost energy in the classroom. But you get some talking, you get some of these things going on in exactly the same way. And also, if you go to your Center for Teaching and Learning on your campus, they have so many resources and more consultations. Most do it with grad students as well. And so, like, a really great place to send people there.
I wanted to thank her.
Okay.
Thank you. Ooh, interesting. You asked a very good question that I did not consider. I was sort of hyper-focused on this idea of, is whiteness seeping into the classroom, yes or no? And I didn't really think about the demographics of the instructors when it came to that. Because this happened at the point of my dissertation process where I just had all of the data already in like a nice little spreadsheet. So I was like, I guess I'll just read it with this question in mind. And I forgot to like consider the demographics that these are coming from. But I think you're right. There is a conversation to be had because Carlos did talk about how the way that he learned something like division was different from how he learned it in his hometown. And so that was like a conversation that we did have that did not come up in the sort of framework that I did. Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for that clarification. But yes, you are right. I should have given him more time and honor on that. But yes, Ferry is not a spokesperson for the banking model. He is vehemently against the banking model of education. But yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, so I didn't have, as you can see, it was a lot. But there was like a component of my research that was looking at how are these 3 talking about what it needs to teach because they're teaching their class. So Paul was definitely had that freedom of, I got to drop this unit and do this other activity that I think was more fruitful because I don't have to worry that these students are going to take another math class. Andy and Carlos are like, well, these students have to take another math class. Carlos specifically because intermediate algebra was not a college satisfying college degree requirement satisfying. And so his entire class had to take another math class. And so that was a conversation that we did have that did come up. It just did not come up in this presentation. So the supports were, the courses were convened. So they would meet weekly. They have a set calendar of events. You teach this section, this class. There is a lesson plan online if you so choose to use it. The weekly meetings consisted of bringing in your concerns about teaching and talking it out with a more senior instructor or maybe a professor. The department also has a culture of just open door where you could just share out and vent with others. There is a pedagogy course that the first year, these students are required to take. And so that meets like twice a week in the first semester or fall semester and once a week during the spring semester. So they're getting a lot of pedagogical help in these certain ways that I feel like supported their idea of, oh, I should be doing active learning and I should be viewing mathematics as this endeavor of collaboratively learning.
Right, I think that wraps up all the time that we have. Let's give our speakers